All right. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the SSB Ground School. Tonight, we're going to hear from Mark Terry. He's going to talk about landouts and retrieves. And Mark is a great pilot. He's a multi-engine double I instrument instructor. He's of course, CFIG. He's one of our club instructors. Mark is also was president for a year of the club, and he was instrumental in getting our first DG 505 two-place high performance aircraft. He was SSB, Society of Boulders chief flight instructor, and he's also a tow pilot. Flies a lot. It goes back to the days when we had a Blannock for training. Also, you know, when I flew with him once for his annual check, and I said, gee, Mark, I haven't had a flight this smooth since I flew with Elliot Crawford, our resident DPE. And Mark said, oh, I trained Elliot. And I wanted to go, oh, bull feathers, you know. And then I thought about it. I said, well, you know, these guys are both Brits. Maybe he has. And yeah, indeed, that is correct. He did train our DPE. You know, an extra one that he sent me for his qualifications for doing this particular session is that he has experience landing out in Colorado, New Mexico, Wyoming, Nebraska, Texas, Iowa, Utah, and Arizona. So with that, not only is he a great instructor and a great pilot, but he's also got plenty of land out experience. So with that, Mark, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay. All right. Let's see.
Get your teeth fixed.
Thank you. So
I had it from your email, but I think you got it now.
okay.
So please.
All right, here we go then. I'll go through the slides reasonably fast, and then we could have a discussion. Because I'm sure there's plenty of people with land out stories that'll be quite amusing or instructive. So yeah, the phrase you want for land outs is you've got to be prepared. This is the first 505 that we had. That was when I had some hair, and the guy in the front is my son. I was taken down in Salida. Okay, so we just talked about this. We can set up a meeting, a session, which we used to do. We used to just take off, get north of Longmont, then let the guy who's ever wants to practice go ahead and land it at Longmont. And it's pretty easy to have a crew there and get the guy off. We could probably get the guy off without having to pull him off the runway, just stage the tow plane there. So again, if anybody wants to do that, let Armand and myself know. All right, so cross country, what is it? So FAR definition is 50 nautical miles as the crow flies, and you can log that as cross country. That's for airplanes, but if you're flying gliders and if you've done more than 50 nautical miles out, you can log it as cross country. So the first cross country that I did was the Silver Badge, and I did it from Boulder and just to Owl Canyon. So that's pretty easy. And in fact, you can do it in one final glide. If you get up to about 16, 17 above Boulder, you can make Owl Canyon without turning. What I use is like an easy calculation that you can do up there is just 5 nautical miles, 1,000 foot. It's about 30 to 1. And that would, you can do that in your head and sort of give you some confirmation that you can make the destination that you're going for. Nowadays, everybody has a final glide computer in their glider, so you'll get better information by using that. But if you ever end up without any instruments and want to know whether you can make it back home, 30 to 1 in most gliders nowadays will get you back. But with all landouts, as you do the final glide, you kind of want to arrive with some altitude for maneuvering. So a good safety would be 2K above ground. You would not get high enough over Boulder to make El Canyon in one final glide. You'd start off maybe at 5,000 AGL, and then you'll need to use some intermediate land out options. So for that route, you could use Longmont, Fort Collins, Loveland, Chrisman, and there are absolute ton of fields that are usable, particularly east of 25. So a more ambitious thing that you might want to do once you get into the cross country is Gross Reservoir to Laramie. It's about 80 nautical miles, and out and back will give you a gold badge. But that trip to Laramie really needs some careful selection of landouts. And my rule for going into Laramie is at the Wyoming border. I want Laramie as a final glide. Impressed by people that don't do that, because I haven't really seen anywhere safe that you can land it between the Wyoming border and Laramie Airport. So just to reiterate, if you're planning a cross country, you should look at the route, work out some safe land out options for when you get low or the lift disappears. So we can look at that first thing that I talked about, the silver badge. So take off from Boulder. Longmont's very convenient. Off to the right, you can make Fort Collins, Loveland up here, and there's Christman up here, and there's Owl Canyon. I just looked at this thing here. I think it's called Sprague, and that's a landing strip. It's on the sectional, and I think that's a good example of a landing strip that you would never want to use unless I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. But Christman is definitely usable. Let's see if I can show you those. Something else. All right, stop the share on that one. See if we can get this one up. Okay. One good resource for looking at the landing strips and small airports is this. You can pick up, I don't know whether anybody's seen it, it's the Colorado airport directory, and you can get it from Journeys. It's always on the tables there. And for any of the landing strips that are on the section or any of the small airports, you can get that. And we were talking about Blanca Airport, I think last week, and this is the page for the Blanca Airport. Anyway, that's just one resource. Can you guys see this? Is this up?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, all right, so let me see if I can find that Sprague place. Here's Christman. Has anybody landed there? Nobody? We've had people in the past land at Christman, and I've towed them out here. I think somebody was saying that there's a fixed gate at the moment. You couldn't actually drive in. I don't know whether that's the case at the moment. But if you landed there and there's enough daylight, the tow plane could come get you. As long as you've got a glider that is safe to take off without a wing runner. Let's see. So trying to find the spray place. Where is it?
Mark, I've flown over it before. It's, I think, around the rock quarry. The thing's on a ridge.
Yeah, it's ugly.
Yeah. Yes, it is ugly, but it's on there. Why can't I find it? It's near Masonville. I have it. It's in here somewhere.
I think it's on the quarried section
What, to the left here
to the
somewhere?
north.
No, it's, yeah.
Somewhere here, isn't it?
Yeah, just sort of.
Oh, I got it. Here we go. So it's on there as a sectional. It looks like you could land a 172 there, but it's got bushes, trees, rocks. So that's probably a good example of what you might see on a sectional. It's there marked, but for a glider, I wouldn't go in there. And besides, you know, it isn't that far to go to Christman. There's Christman. And okay, there's plenty of fields. There's even one with Terry's name on it. There you go. This would be a good example of a field that you could use as land out. It's brown. We all know the phrase, if it's brown, get down. Plenty long enough, and access up here. So if you were going to go for a field, that's kind of what you would like to see. Anything with green in is, you just don't know what the crop size is unless you've been down there on the ground. So, all right. Let's see. I'll go back to the talk. I'll find it. All right, while I'm looking for that one. You can replay any of your previous trips on Google. Does everybody know how to do that? Take an IGC file and put it in?
Yeah, you have to convert your IGC file to a K something file. And
Yeah, and there's another step that you have to do, which I have to use an editor for it. You have to fix the tilt per point so that it doesn't keep tilting down to the ground. We can watch this for a little bit. This is my last land out. I'll tell you why it's a little bit interesting later on. I was coming back from Salida, and it was the day of the forest fire that was so bad that nobody could see anything. So when I got to Mount Evans, I could see the Flatirons, but I couldn't see anything else east of the Flatirons. And so when I was about here, I sort of slowed up, which was a mistake. And at this time, you can see with the ground, but I couldn't see anything at all. I was completely IFR. And I didn't really have any instruments that would help me out. So this last few minutes, I could not see a thing. And I was just hoping that I just kept the glider right way up. Sooner or later, I would drop through it and have some time to pick somewhere to go. But this is me wandering around in the smoke.
Mark, what was your altitude over all the cities there?
Maybe 1,000, maybe 1,000. So I did have one thing that was telling me where Boulder was, but I was sort of focused on trying to keep the thing from spinning. And if you ever flown a Ventus, you know that isn't, if you take your hands off, it pretty much spins straight away. Anyway, about now I could start to see things underneath the plane. And fortunately, when I looked out, I could see Jeffco runway. There's the landing. Now, Jeffco was below minimums at that point. I'm not sure where minimums are. Is that 200 feet? That's not me rolling over, that's just the plane. So that was quite an interesting experience. I recommend that you can get on your cell phones nowadays an artificial horizon programs. There's several of them out there. There's one called Talis, which is pretty good, and I've flown with that since on a clear day, just looking out, and it worked pretty well. So I've got that as a backup. Right, oh, there we go. Okay, back to this. Okay. All right. So you've started out on route, you've got some land out options. When would you use them? Well, if you're on a really long cross country and you haven't made enough progress, there comes a time where, you know, daylight's running out and, you know, you don't have enough daylight and speed to make it back to home base. So you would want to make a land out before the daylight of the lift completely disappears, so you can make a precautionary one. So that would be daylight disappearing, and other times that you would want to do it is if you've got weather deterioration. So that could be typically the most favorite one is, or the most common one is, you're going to run into a thunderstorm, but it could be rain, snow, or smoke in these days. So it's good if you've planned it out. You should always, at any stage within that cross country that you're doing, you should be able to look up and head for something that's suitable. This is a picture when I was out going somewhere, and this verger here, you could see lightning coming down every, I don't know, every minute or so. So there was a point where you thought, I was thinking, should I go through this, or should I turn and find somewhere another direction and land out? So that's a type of precautionary type of thing, that where you might want to land out prior, when there's plenty of lift, but you just know you can't make it back. The other time you're going to land out is the obvious one, when the lift is gone and you're not within final glade of the destination or home field, and or you've blundered into a wide area of strong sink. So how low would you go? There's no real hard and fast height above ground where you'd say, well, I've just got to go in now. But once you get down to about 2000 AGL, you really should always have a field or a site that you can keep within range while you're searching. And at some point or other, you're going to commit to landing. And you want to do that while you've still got a chance of doing some sort of pattern. The pattern will allow you to look for obstacles. It'll be able to tell you where the wind is. And you want to be able to make a decent approach. And the way we do it in a glider is we're approaching, we use about half spoiler or brake. That means you can put it in if you're not going to make it, and you can pull it out if you want to get in. So you do not want to drag it in over a fence or a wire. So make that commitment to landing while you still got a chance of making a halfway decent pattern. And now where would you go? Well, the favorite thing, what I plan for, is a small airport. If I'm going to go anywhere, I just look at all the small airports on the way, and that would be my first choice. If they've got a tower, you need to know what the AWOS is. You need to know the frequencies. And if you're sort of thinking about going into somewhere with a tower, you need to get on the radio and let them know where you are and what your intentions are. If you're looking for lift and it looks like you can get away, you can just say, well, I'm out here southwest, so many miles at this altitude, I'm looking for lift, but I may need to come in and land. And once you've got that, again with the tower, you're going to ask them which runway to go in, but you need to give the traffic, if it's a small airport without a tower, you need to go on the radio and let the traffic know that you're coming in, and you will need some time to push off. So with airfields, the one thing you know is the surface is going to be good. If you've done the pre-planning, you'll know whether it's wide enough. You know that good facilities. And once you're over the runway, unless the tower is directing you to a particular runway, you have the choice into wind. And for God's sake, just stop on the runway. If you can manage the roll to be opposite a taxiway, stop there, then get out and push off. You don't want to take out any of the runway signage. So, this is Santa Fe Airport. I landed out there years ago from Boulder, and when I got down there, my radio, I couldn't transmit. This is me on a downwind out there, and I was rocking my wings, and they radioed to me saying, do you need to land, and all that type of thing. So I went through that, clicked the transmitter and rocked the wings. Anyway, they gave me permission to land, and I landed out at Santa Fe. So you should be aware of what the no radio procedures are. I've always found out that the tower people are very helpful. So don't be afraid of making use of their facilities. Now, I recently heard somewhere that you're supposed to say that you're an experimental glider. I'm not sure why that is, but there's no reason why you can't just say you're a glider experimental, and the lift conditions are such that you're going to be landing within the next 5 minutes or so. So apart from airfields, the next thing you would want to use is a landing strip. And as we've seen, there's many on the sectional, and some on the sectional haven't been used for years, and they're unusable. There's one called Crystal Lakes. Has anybody got that in that database as usable? It's kind of north of Horsetooth.
Yeah, I think we
I've
decided
actually,
Crystal Lakes was not really landable because of.
right, yeah. I went up there, I drove it. It is unusable. And I believe it's a white supremacist compound, judging by all the signs about don't trespass, and we have weapons and stuff like that. So, and it's very difficult to get to trailer into. Anyway, that's just an example of one that's on the sectional, and I used to have it as an out, and I'm glad that I actually went and visited it because I've just taken it away. Anyway, if it's in use and it's in the Colorado Airport Directory, and other people have got, or you can look at it on Google, a strip is good because it's going to be level or minimal slope. The access should be good. But another thing to think about is when you're going in there, if it looks dubious, it's quite often, not all the case, but quite often the surrounding fields may be better. Some of the strips are, might be difficult to get to roads. So. And then there's the fields after that, strips, fields. So does everybody know the SLOW acronym? SLOW, surface slope, length, obstacles, wind. You say that to yourself. Check those off as a checklist when you're looking at this field to go into. I won't go into a field with cattle unless there's absolutely no other choice. And if you can see crops, well, you're just gonna damage the glider. It will ground loop. Even some grass that's like about 6, 8 inches high, you're going to ground loop unless you've got really wide, high wings. As soon as you one tip drops, grass will catch it and then you'll spin around. So the best visual clue to use is if it's brown, get down, and brown in terms of plowed. There's no crops, it's bound to be, there's no rocks. If it's plowed, you want to land with the furrows, you don't want to land across them. So I think there's quite a few other tips on the fields. Perhaps hear from somebody else about what they've used. The other thing not to rule out is roads. I think we talked about that. I think last week there were a few roads that have been put in as options. I've landed on a road at least a couple of times. Obviously, you need to look either side of the road. You don't want any wires, posts, or ditches. But in some areas of the country, there's just the dirt roads are actually very good. So you need to consider those as well. And, you know, for any route that you're planning, you know, you can use Google and get down real close and see whether that is the case for the route that you're using. All right. Has everybody read Reichman's book? You know what I'm talking about? Helmut Reichman, world champion in the, I think, 80s, 90s.
Yeah, I don't know if everybody's read it, but I've read his book.
Yeah, it's worth reading. It's a bit dated now. Well, so he's going. If you can see this, you might want to read the quote about unlandable areas. If you're going over something that's unlandable in terms of like, you know, trees, lakes, big rocks and stuff, you don't want to do that unless you know you've got a final glide out. I mean, the sky can look pretty good, but all of us have headed towards obviously good looking lift and found nothing at various times in our soaring lives. So if it's unlandable, unless you're absolutely convinced the lift is there and it's good, I wouldn't go over it unless you've got a final glide out. And the stuff that you might encounter, which are going to give you real headaches, the trees, lakes, and rocks. So the only advice I've seen about trees is that you try to crash between them. And then there's a story of some guy, I think he used to fly out of Boulder. He had a motor glider, he had a problem, and he landed in a field and he put the nose in between two trees, completely destroyed his motor glider, but there was plenty of room not to have landed between the trees. So, I don't know whether that's an apocryphal story or not, but apparently it's true. Lakes, I wouldn't go there, but if you end up, I think the advice is to have your gear up and get the canopy open just before landing. And I don't know, I'd hate to go in.
Everyone says gear should be down though.
Well, that's not what they say for aircraft. So I don't know. I've never done it. It's not something you would practice. I believe if you have your gear down, you're going to flip straight away. So, yeah, the advice for ditching an aircraft that's got retractable gear is to have the gear up.
Yeah, if I might pipe in, every airplane I've ever flown, definitely a ditching is a gear up situation.
Yeah. Okay. I do know some guy that did it, but I don't think he's on with us at the moment.
Yeah, Pedja landed in Gross Reservoir.
Yeah, and I believe he had his gear down and he flipped.
Yes. Yeah.
The POH in my aircraft definitely says gear down. It says you'll go under like a torpedo and hit the bottom if you don't.
No, well, I'm not doing a test pilot. The one guy that I know that did it, I think, flipped. So, all right. I think my advice is to always obey the Reichman quote, and that's always have a final glide out. So, all right. So where wouldn't you want to go? Absolutely not go. Well, obviously Area 51, because I think nobody would hear from you again. I've heard bad stories about people landing in Indian reservations. They basically see it as an opportunity to make money. I'm not being racist here. It's just what I've heard. I should stay away from white supremacist compounds, I suppose, Montana. If you're an extreme liberal like me, that would be good advice, because my mouth would give me away and I'd probably never be heard from again. National Parkland. Does anybody know the story of Bob Wayland? Years and years ago. he landed in, I don't know where it was a national parkland, and they would not allow him to take the trailer in to get it. And it was a helicopter retrieve.
Ooh.
And I think that nowadays that'd be more than what the glider is worth, most gliders.
Hey, Mark,
Yeah.
that was Gulf 6.
No, it wasn't.
Well,
It
Gulf
wasn't,
6 had the same issue. It landed in
Yeah, it might be a different incident, but I know Bob Lay, he used to fly something, Pegasus or something with a side stick. And
Zuni. It was a Zuni.
Zuni, yeah. His was a helicopter retrieve. Are you saying Gulf 6 did the same thing?
Yep. He landed on the western slope, and he had to helicopter it out.
How much was that? Do you know?
Oh, that was 30 years ago. I don't know.
No, I mean, how much did it cost him? Was
I
it
don't know.
thousands?
That was, like I say, 30, 35 years ago. Long time.
Yeah. And restricted areas, well, they're marked on a map, and if you go in there, you probably will have some talking to do with the FAA. So you can avoid all of that by knowing where, just the route that you're going into. So, all right. So how to do the land out? Well, I've talked a little bit about that. I mean, if it's an airfield, there should be no problem. If it's a field, you've got to select it. You don't, no crops, no cattle. It's got to be level if you can, long enough. And so you can go through this slow acronym as you're thinking about it. Before you go in, you want to do some radio work, let other gliders know. You definitely want to, as you get into the pattern, you definitely want to go through your stall, will you stall check, your landing checklist. And for those who haven't read Reichman's book, he's got a section on land out techniques, and it's really quite good. So I would go ahead and read that if you've never done any land outs before. So I've talked a little bit about this. There is this time where you mentally have got to say to yourself, I am landing out here. Do not still try to rescue yourself below a safe altitude. So perhaps the major thing with a field is to know if there is a slope, because you want to land uphill. Otherwise, you're just going to run out of the field and you're going to crash at the other end. So length, I think most people can judge whether it's long enough to get their glider in. And the other thing you've got to really look out for is, if it's not one of these brown plowed fields, is obstacles. Bales of hay, pipes, and wires. Wires will kill you. When Charlie was on the other evening, he was talking about he landed at that field, and then, when he was down, he noticed there were pipes and things sticking out of the ground. So sometimes they're not that difficult to see, but if you encounter them, you're going to get wrecked. Obviously, wind is important if it's a strong wind. And as you're flying along, you definitely want to always keep a mind of where is the wind. And lakes are very good for telling you where the wind is, smoke is, some trees. I think isn't it like the cattle always stand with their backs to the wind? I don't know, something like that. Anyway, if you've got a large enough surface field, then, into wind and it's smooth, make it into wind.
Mark, you want to tell us how you know by looking at a lake, which way the wind is blowing?
Well, the smooth part will be is the windward. The rough part will be the leeward of the wind. So you see the smooth part on the lakes. There's so many lakes out at Boulder, the Res, and a few lakes. Each time you come in, you should have a look at what the lakes are doing. They're sometimes more informative than the AWAS. So the smooth part of the lake will be pointing into wind.
Yeah, the upwind part of the lake, you know, because of the lake is going to have a lip and the water is a little bit below the lip of the lake, then where it's smooth, that's where the wind is coming from.
Yeah, that's right. And if you don't delay landing, if you give yourself enough time, you can do a bit of a pattern. You know, I'd recommend doing a crosswind and the downwind, and your crosswind downwind will allow you to access the wind. If you've got it wrong and you're high enough, then you can make the correction. If it's plowed, the furrows are going to force you to land with them. You can't land across them. You'll just end up bucking and, I don't know, flipping. And I think Colin at the other meeting last week, you see these circular fields and they've got these water pumps in them. And he was saying if you land at the edge, that's usually pretty smooth and it gets you out of the drainage equipment, the water equipment. So that's a good piece of advice. And quite often those circular fields, if they're really green, well, they've got crops in them. And if they're brown, then you know they're pretty safe. And the water equipment is probably not going to be active at that time. So that's a good choice of a field.
Hey, Mark, could I add one to your checklist, your pre-landing checklist?
Yeah.
I don't know if it's in your acronym or not, but cinching your belts down really tight is very important before landing. It's something you might forget. It's not something we routinely do when we land at Boulder, but cinching them down really tight is important.
Yeah, that's good advice. Let's see what else we have. So you can practice selecting fields, you know, just on local stuff. You should do that every time you get up there. Have a look at the fields. Pick out some that you think would be good, and then later on you could drive around them and see how good they were. And you can use Google Earth. I mean, sometimes the photography is years out of date and it won't tell you about crops, but it will tell you length of the field, width of the field, and the slope. So you can practice that. If anybody wanted to go up in a power plane and do some looking at fields, I'd be happy to oblige as long as you pick up the expenses. So what else? So land out kit. When you probably need all of these things. Everybody has a cell phone. A handheld radio is really good to have in the cockpit because if you get a problem with the radio, you can switch to that. You're going to need water. I mean, everybody flies with water. You might need some extra in the storage compartment if you land out, especially I suppose if it was a desert. Tie down kit. I don't know how many people have tie down kits in their glider, but just a few small stakes and some cordage will be useful. And I guess everybody's flying with what, spot or inReach? Is that true nowadays? Beacons to let other people know where you went in.
It's required. Yeah, the spot or the inReach is required for
contests, right?
Yeah, for contests now. A lot of people are flying with them, but I'm not sure if everyone is.
Yeah, I recently bought an inReach. It's pretty good. The monthly cost is a little bit, so you can only, you could just activate it in season. but it's pretty good. It will work on the Iridium satellite system. So if your cell phone, you've got no cell phone usage, eInReach you'll be able to send off a text message to your retrieve with your coordinates, and that's always going to work, or should always work.
That's an oldie.
Yeah. Every time I went up to Laramie, I used to land out. Probably because I didn't know what I was doing. This is a picture from my first Laramie land out. And you can see the sky. I mean, I probably got up there when the stuff was doing that. So there was no way I was going to go back out. I did get rescued by my wife this time. And that was the one and only time that my wife has come got me. I don't know. I hope other people are able to smooth their partners into rescuing them. I think I made some mistakes in this land out retrieve, and I haven't been able to correct them. So anyway.
Now, Mark, I need to remind you that your wife came and got me once from the land out.
Yes, yes, you probably had the right attitude. I don't know. Yeah.
And it was in that trip also, when we used to have a camp at Buena Vista. I landed out of Salida at the end of a camp, and she was the only one left to come and get me.
My God, well, you better vibes than me. I don't know what your trick is. All right, après land out. So you're down. If it's a tower airfield, you want to get on the radio and say, you're fine, and that you're attempting to get it off. Usually they send out, a retrieve vehicle for you and get you off. That's what they did in Jeffco last time I landed. They all came out. In a field or somewhere else, you need to think about, do you need to secure the glider if it's windy, or you need to get it out of the way of the irrigation equipment, that type of thing. So, once you got in and got out, maybe phone the retrieve crew, you want to think about securing it. That's why sometimes it's good to have a tie down kit in the glider. You can use your parachute to weigh down a wing. You can pop out the spoilers, keep them out with the seat belt. That will prevent, at least help with the wind. And okay, so if you're down in a field, usually when I land in a field, it isn't too long before people, because I always try to get near a road. Some people will be traipsing across to talk to you, and you want to reassure them that you're fine and you don't need the emergency services unless you do, because they're trying to be helpful, and then you'll get all sorts of extra attention that you don't necessarily want. And if you are talking to people, really be polite, and people are going to remember and talk about this event. So this is a chance for you to do some positive relations for the sport. So, don't be grumpy just because you've landed out and you're going to have to wait a few hours for the retrieve. Try to put on a positive front for those. And if it's a really hot day and it's in the desert or New Mexico, Texas, you might want to see if you can find some shelter from the sun, because the typical retrieve is going to be two hours plus before anybody arrives. Maybe you'll be lucky. Let's see. Okay, retrieves. So obviously if you landed in an airport, it should be really easy, and the crew can make, the retrieve vehicles can make it up to you, and you might opt to ask the tow plane to come get you. And if there's enough daylight, somebody will I'd be pleased to come get you because it's free flying. Even if it's at the end of the day, you might consider, well, I'll find a motel and we'll fly out the next day. You do need to make sure you can get a wing runner if you need a wing runner. I thought about a scenario for Christman. I'll talk about that later, because if there's no way to get a retrieve vehicle in and you need a wing runner, we could bring the Cub up. He could run your wing. We could tow you up high enough so you can get back. You can go back and pick up the wing runner. But okay. All right. So the rates, you might want to know these because it's going to be a couple of hours at least. If you land out of Leadville, you'll probably need the Pawnee. And if it's me coming to get you, you're going to have to throw in some danger money. Leadville is the highest isn't it? I think it's the highest airport in the lower 48, isn't it?
Yes.
And so on a hot day, well, I've towed people out of Leadville. We always use the entire runway, and it takes a bit to get above the trees. So wing runner, like con somebody coming out and running your wing. A lot of people can, I think, can you get the discus off without a wing runner? He's got little skids, hasn't he?
Yeah, you can, yeah, the discus will take off without a wing runner.
But I can't, my Ventus won't. It's got a CG hook and there's no way I could run. I don't need much of a wing run, but I do need one. Yeah, when you're down, talk to the tower, the FBO, if it's a tower airfield. If it's a landing strip, there's sometimes a difficulty with gates. And we were talking about, was one field or strip that we needed to know the code to get out. I can't remember which one that was. Was it Silver West or something? Sometimes you can find out what those codes are before you launch. So every farmer that's come up to me has been really quite pleasant. Mind you, I've always landed, no, with a couple of exceptions, I've always landed where there was no crops. And the exception with the crops, it was very small crop, and he said he was going to plow it in anyway. He didn't care. But other people may have other stories. I will never go into a field with a livestock unless it's absolutely essential. There come the cows come and they lick your aircraft and put feet over it. And Armin was saying the other day, if there's only one cow in the field, that might be more problematic. So, and then you need your retrieve. Sometimes for these things, you need a retrieve kit. And I think we've built one, haven't we? That's in the shack somewhere.
Yeah, Scott
Yes,
put one together.
and I haven't checked it this season. Does everybody know where it is? Is it in the small shack or the big shack?
Small shack.
Is it labeled retrieve kit or is it obvious?
No, but it's pretty heavy and you'll find it.
Okay, so you might ask, once you're down and if you think you need bolt cutters or whatever it was, or was it a 2x4 or something to lift up
Yeah, I encourage everybody to go into that shack and open that bag that has it in there. And by the way, Danny just noted the reason you don't land if there's only one cow there is because it's not a cow, it's a bull. And
yeah.
Bull is kept in a bullpen all by himself.
Yeah. Right. So we put together a list of people that you can call, right? I believe this is and we need to update that, I guess, this season.
Yep.
I know I'm on there and Armin's on there, and as I will come and get you in the tow plane if that's feasible. And if you know that you're going to do a challenging cross country, you probably want to talk to somebody before you go. So they would be your first person on the list. But since we've got a list with a kind of retrieve ring, that if they can't do it, they can just phone up the next person, and sooner or later somebody will come get you.
Sorry, I maintain this list, Mark. So if anyone wants to be on that list, they can just click on that link.
Yes.
And update it themselves. And if they have a Google account, they can update it themselves. If they don't have a Google account, just send me an email and I'll get your data in it.
Okay. Anyway, so that does it for my slides. I was hoping we could get some people to share land out experiences. I have got a couple, but I think I've been through some of them.
Hey, Mark, could I add one to the before land out consideration? If you're flying in radio contact with other gliders,
Yeah.
and you know you're going to land out, it'd be a very good idea to let them know.
Right.
That's what's going to happen, because you may land someplace your phone may not have reception.
Yes.
And it may be a lot longer before anybody knows you're gone.
Yeah. Yes. Well, yeah, typically on a cross country, you kind of call your turn points and where you are. And yeah, it's a good point to, let them know you're getting low where you are. Yeah.
Yeah. Does anybody have, this would be a good time. We got some extra time here. Does anybody have a good land out story that they would like to share with the group? Nobody's landed out?
I've got
Come on.
I've got one up for Nephi.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Flying south of Nephi, 3,000 feet of final glide to arrival altitude of Nephi, Virga between me and Nephi. A minute and a half to 2 minutes later, I was in the field below me because of the Virga situation in the field.
Yeah, sometimes you fly through that stuff, and sometimes it's good and you go up, and other times, man, it's frightening what the sink rate is. Yeah.
Yeah, that was religious. One other one in Nephi was caution about a cell in the opposite direction to what everybody's landing to the north. There was a cell to the south. Touchdown, slowing down, getting to the end. There's a guy clearing the runway at the end, and I had never thought of it before until I got in that situation. I was pulling out the air brakes. There's a point where they turn into a sail, and I accelerated down the runway to a faster speed than when the gust front hit me, and I went through the runway lights at the end and about 150 yards into the dirt where I get a modest ground loop. So there's a point at which if you're landing with the wind, your spoilers are not your best friend.
Right.
You really rely on your brakes unless they're 4-inch toes.
Yeah. But another point is to get your brakes tweaked up before the season, so that
Yeah.
Anyone have thoughts on landing upwind and uphill and downwind versus downwind and downhill and upwind?
the slope is supposed to be the deciding factor.
Yeah, and
I
if
mean,
you're,
it would have to be a really strong wind. You're better off landing uphill. If you can see the slope, you want to land up it.
yeah, and the good news, if you're on the front range, the wind tends to be out of the west and the slope also tends to be uphill to the west. So,
Yeah.
the one thing that I see, and I don't really have much land out. I have one land out experience here in Colorado, but mostly I have not landed out because I'm pretty chicken, and I try not to get into a situation where I might have to land out. But it just seems to me that you really want to get out of the mountains There's, your chances of finding a good field once you get east of the Front Range are a lot better than finding something usable in the mountains. In the
Yeah.
foothills, it's just, boy, there's not much. There's not many places I'd want to land out. And, there might be some places you can land out and save yourself, but, the insurance company is going to get the glider.
Well, the typical advice that I give people is, in the mountains, you can, most of the time, if you turn east and just final glide out, you'll get out of the mountains. But there are some exceptions. Who was it that went into Estes Park last season? Was it?
Oh, that was, you went and retrieved him.
Yeah.
That was Andrew Ansley.
Andrew, right.
Yeah.
And I think he found virtually the only landable spot in Estes Park. And unfortunately, it's usable, but I believe now they're building houses on it. So I think the last good spot is gone. He did land down slope. And I think he was fortunate because there was a sort of level bit slightly down, and then it really went down. And I could see where he dug the glider in to prevent going downhill. He would have been better landing the opposite direction. But he was okay. Ship was okay. So, but he would have been better off turning east before he got into all of that down. So, or favoring the sort of east and edge. So, yeah.
Yeah, but go ahead, Scott.
Go ahead.
No, Scott.
I have a question. Go ahead and finish up that and I'll move on to the question then.
Well, I was just going to say, I've driven back and forth across the Front Range, along the Front Range, on the prairie part of the Front Range. And shoot, there's fields all over the place. Scott, you landed in one. I came and retrieved you in one. You had a horse field there. And, there's just a lot of places where you can get out of trouble, even if they're not marked as land out places. So, get out of the mountain. And like Mark was saying, the Front Range slopes down to the east. So even if you're you're pretty low out over the mountains, you still might be able to make it to the prairie and, find a horse field or some field or something that you can land out in the prairie. Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, Mark, question I have, I think in my training said if you're landing out and you're coming up towards the end of the usable field, you got a fence or something, right, that push the stick forward to get the tail up and ground loop the thing.
Yeah, that's what I would do.
What about just, if you've got enough brakes, what about just putting the thing on its nose?
Yeah, that might work. You could pull the gear up as well. I know that Richard Hall had an event like that, and he ground looped and he went into the hedge backwards, and that's what he did. So.
And I was thinking about doing damage to the wing. I guess you're trying to get the tail up so you don't break the tail.
Yeah.
And then are you going to do damage to the wing? And I was just wondering if you've got enough brakes to be able to put the thing on the nose, if you're just better off just doing that because you're not scratching up or gouging a critical part of the fuselage strength-wise. And the thing is pretty easily repairable compared to breaking a wing or something.
Yeah. I don't know. I think when you're in these land out situations and you pick the field, you come in at a reasonable airspeed. I'm just thankful to touch down and just keep the wings low. And at that point, if I was rushing up towards an obstacle, I'd ground loop it. I wouldn't be thinking about how do I save my glider? I'll be thinking about how do I save myself. So.
Yeah, and fences are something that really bothers me as I drive around and I look at places and you go, well, that's a good land out field. And then you see, as you're driving by, and you go, oh, wow, there's a metal fence, and maybe it's barbed wire or whatever kind of wire fence. And if you go through that, I mean, you're going through a cheese slicer. And
Yes.
so
Yeah.
if it is like, oh, I'm going to hit the fence, there's like no way out of it. You want to hit it on the post, and then the glider will go up over it. The insurance company is going to get the glider, but that's another, that's a side consideration. You don't want to go through the middle of that fence between the posts where your fuselage is going through the cheese slicer. You want to hit the post, knock the post over, and go up. And yeah, you're going to ruin the glider, but there's more gliders.
I know in that. If that's happening to me, I'm ground looping, going in backwards.
Well, yeah, if you can ground loop, that would be preferable. If you don't see that fence in time,
Right.
You want to go for the post, not for the wire. Hopefully, none of us will ever have to make that decision.
One thing I'd like to emphasize, and Mark mentioned it, but in your land out kit, have plenty of water. Because when we used to have all the soaring camps in Dalhart, and I had numerous land outs around Dalhart, but one of them on the road towards Clayton on Highway 54, I landed out, and it was well over 3 hours for the retrieve, and it was 110 degrees.
Yeah.
And there was no shade whatsoever. So I found a street sign and sat in the shade of the street sign with my water, two water bottles, and watching an ant colony, things, just to spend the time. But it was rather humorous. But I was glad when the retrieve crew finally got there, because I mean, I was hot.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why if you can get to an airfield or a strip with some facilities, that's better. And sometimes the precautionary land out, if you know that there's not enough left to make it back and you're really struggling, and there's something somewhere convenient to go in, that makes the retrieve and the wait manageable.
Okay, does anybody have an interesting land out story to share with the group that would we can end this on a note where we can all have at least a smile?
I'll share one.
Yeah, Omri's our guy who says if you're not landing out twice a year, you're not trying hard enough. So Omri, please go ahead, give us a land out story.
All right, so this is back in Texas. Armand, I don't know if you remember Hearn Airport, about 11 miles east of TSA.
Yeah.
Anyhow, I just landed out, easy landing, no problem. It's a little tiny private airport. I gave him a call and I said, hey, it's close. Why don't you just send out a token? Like, okay, cool. We'll be busy for a little bit. We'll send one out in about an hour. Why don't you go see if you can round up a wing runner, because it's a fairly narrow runway. So at the end of the runway, there's a little house. I go over there. There's nobody there, but there's a little shop next to it, and there's some guy in there working on it was like a lathe or some kind of machine. I asked him, hey man, I just landed at the airport over here. Can you do me a solid and run my wing? It's really easy. It doesn't require any skill. I just need somebody to do it. And he goes, you know what, man? I'd love to help you, but I'm not allowed to leave the premises. And then he shows me an ankle bracelet.
That's great.
I've got interesting. My first land out was down at Dalhart, Texas. And if you ever been down there or in that neck of the woods, they've got a lot of the crop circles, and they're either a quarter or a half or a full section. They're big. And so, we were talking last week about, crop circles and the pivots, and, I would never land, if I could avoid it, I would never land in the circle because of the, being wet and the crops are usually high. So, when we were at Dalhart years ago, the corn was probably 6-7 foot high. So, you just didn't want to go into a crop circle. But I ended up landing in the corner of the crop circle because they were, the farmer would go in and he would plow the corners just to get rid of the weeds.
Yeah.
So it was fairly soft, and you got a nice cross runways, right? I mean, you're in the corner so you can land either direction.
Yeah.
And after I landed, it got out and I paced it off, and it was, my ground roll was 160 feet. So it was soft. So I was thinking about, well, I'm going to get on the brake and stop. Well, that wasn't a problem because as soon as I put weight on that main gear, it went up on its nose and stopped, like I say, in 160 feet. But the interesting part was, I was there for about 15 minutes or so. And then on an ATV, the farmer came out, and really nice guy. He was a pilot, and like just about everybody, all the farmers in Texas are. And he took a look and looked at the road that was, close by, and he said, I got a buddy that's got a spray plane. He said, he could probably pull you out of here if you want. And I said, well, thanks for the offer, but I think I'll just wait for my retrieve crew to come pick me up in the trailer. But he was dead serious. He said, he'll come over and pull you out.
Yeah. I've towed behind one of those really powerful sprayers, and makes a hell of a lot of noise, but you go up about 2,000 foot a minute. Yeah. I have a Dalhart land out story, I've landed out Dalhart, of course, in gliders, but I landed out the 85 Fox at Dalhart in the rain on a road because the ceiling was just coming. I wouldn't have made it to Dalhart.
Anyone else with a land out story?
Oh, Gary, you almost lost the fuel truck there at Dalhart landing on the ramp.
Joe, should I tell him my Dalhart story?
Yes, go on.
Which one, Jack?
Well, the one where you made the retrieve.
Yeah, that was a funny one.
Yeah, no, it was rather humorous, but I had lost some lift, so I was coming back, and I was like downwind in the pattern, announced my intentions, and my buddy Rod Smythe got on the radio. Oh, well, there was a thermal just north of the airfield, just a few minutes ago. Well, that was a few minutes ago. But anyway, so I'm turning like downwind to base leg, and sure enough, there was a good thermal. Well, about that point, I'm, 300-400 feet. And so I decide, well, I'm going to turn in it. So, what do? Do you turn right or you turn left in any thermal? You got a 50-50 chance. Well, I turned right so that I wouldn't be around some houses or some ranches. And I just fell completely out of the thermal. I was down in about probably 10 seconds in an old cornfield. And so here I was, okay, what now? And so Joe was crew that day, and I called him and I said, Joe, I think I'm going to need a retrieve here. And he says, well, where are you? And I says, look down at the end of the ramp and you will see me in the field about a quarter of a mile from the airfield. And unfortunately, there were some really deep ditches, so we could not, just pull the glider to the airfield. We had to do a full retrieve with a trailer and back to the airport. And by that time, I could have landed and easily had a nice relaunch and had a good day. But no, I had to try and get that thermal on base leg. And so what Mark says, below 1,000 feet, commit to land. And boy, I learned my lesson there. So my day was done.
Yeah, I was sitting in the lawn chair in the hangar and I could see you in the field.
So we always give rewards for the longest retrieve, every year. But if you ever had the shortest retrieve, that would have been it.
That was
Well,
fabulous.
I think John landed, he took off from Salida and he landed in the field just off the runway. That was John Seaborn, so it happens to everybody.
Well, with that, if nobody has any other stories, we'll
Armand, I
conclude.
think I told you about my F-16 land out one time, but that's for another day.
No, that's for today. Jeff, please tell us about the F-16 land out.
Well, most of you probably know an F-16 has one engine. So when that one engine isn't working, you're going to be landing out or you're going to be getting out. Landing out so is preferable. And well, I was on my way to a combat mission in Iraq, and my engine started coughing real bad and sounded like it was going to blow up. So I pulled my power all the way back and proceeded to find a place to land outside of Iraq in Turkey. Ended up at a Turkish airfield. Just had just enough. My final glide was probably a good 20 miles from the altitude I was at. Had to jettison my bombs and my fuel tanks. Luckily they landed in a lake, not on
people.
And and then when I went into this course, you're talking to Turkish controller. I was talking to Turkish controllers who, the international standard is speak English, but they don't deal with a lot of English speaking people at this military airfield. So I don't know if I ever really got across them that I was landing, not that I'd like to land. And then the only other neat thing about it is the runway was closed and they were using a taxiway as the runway. So I landed an F-16 flame out on about a 50-foot wide runway, which is pretty narrow for an F-16. So that's my land out. I'm sure I'll have more now that I'm flying gliders, but
Did they impound the F-16?
I mean, they were friendly about it. I guess you could call it an impound. They pretty quickly got a crew out there to, assess. Once I did finally get in touch with home base, which was an ordeal in itself. And the crew proceeded to try to start up the engine, and I went and found a fire bottle so that I was ready to put it out when it blew up. Luckily, they didn't actually start it. They just started the starter for the engine and realized that this wasn't a good idea. So, yeah. And I got my first Black Hawk helicopter flight because of that too. I got to go with them and search for the bombs and tanks. We figured out that they indeed went into a lake.
Are they still there?
They are still there, as far as I know.
So how was
actually, another side note, so these were laser guided bombs, and when they came off the aircraft, they made contact with each other, and we did find, or they did, they found it before I went up with the crew, the seeker head of that. So I have as my probably illegal military contraband, the seeker head of a bomb that I was carrying to Iraq that I jettisoned. I still have that in my basement.
So how was the meeting with your commander?
You
don't have to answer that. You don't have to answer that question.
Yeah, well, it's one of those things where you're always presumed to be the idiot, especially if you're young like I was, until you can prove otherwise. So I think they were convinced once the maintenance chief said no, that engine is cooked. So yeah. It's better than having to punch out. That's the way I look at it. I mean, unless you crash off the end of the runway, but same thing in a glider, I assume. Don't want to. I mean, if you're going to land in a city or land in the rocks or trees, I guess maybe that's another option if you're high enough. But
yeah,
I don't know. You guys tell me.
Hey Jeff, what ultimately happened to the F-16?
Oh, so they found another engine. They have a lot of those in storage. They put it back in it, and instead of going on my 3-day leave with my buddies and going scuba diving, I went back to that Turkish airstrip and I flew my airplane back home.
That Turkish airstrip was part of NATO, it's part of NATO, so they.
No, I mean, it's full up just Turkish. There was, so, I think, we have relations, or did at the time, at least, with the Turks, that things like that happen, because we're operating out of a legitimate NATO airstrip in Turkey. But the one I landed at was kind of weird, because there's all these troops getting onto airplanes, and it turns out they were flying to the Kurdistan area of Iraq. So we all know that the Iraqis weren't very friendly to the Kurds. Well, the Turks aren't either. So it was like this, they were being hit on two sides. So these troops were all going out there to fight the war with the Kurds in Iraq. Lots of little side notes on that story. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad we didn't read about you in the papers.
Yeah.
Jeff, was that Diabakir?
Actually, the Diabakir was an option, but I actually went Diabakir is just the other side of the lake that the weaponry ended up going in. But so another side note on this story, immediately before I lost my engine, I also lost my INS, which this is before GPS. So I had no navigation. So it's pretty much up to my wingman to tell me where to go. And he told me to go north. So it was up in the mountains in northern Turkey. But not too far, about midway between Incirlik and Batman, if you're familiar with Turkey.
Hey, what is the glide ratio of an F-16 dead stick?
Well, it's kind of like the Monty Python question, laden or unladen F-16. So in the condition I was in, it's probably about 6 to 1. I think the best case is about 7 or 8 to 1.
Yeah. Okay.
So you're flying a 233.
No, that's better than a 6 to 1.
Well, with the air brakes out, you're flying a 233.
Yeah, same as a super.
And it's a pretty good, you're going a pretty good clip. I was doing probably about 220 knots or so, 210 knots. So it's pretty quick. Your sink rate's very high. Your glide rates are not very good, but your sink rate's really high.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, I can tell we're going to have to get you someplace and pour some beer down you and hear the rest of the stories.
All right.
But at any rate, I think with that story, we'll go ahead and conclude this session on landouts. So thanks, Mark, for sharing your wisdom here and your experience on landouts, and thanks to everybody else, both in the club and Omri and everybody, for sharing your landout experiences. And we'll see y'all next week. I can't even remember. Does anybody remember who's on next week? I should know this. But anyway, whatever it is, I'll figure it out and get with them. And we'll see y'all next week. Thanks so much for joining the ground school.
Yeah, thanks, Mark.
Thanks much, Mark.